go ahead and jump right in. I know we've got a lot of wonderful information to come tonight. So again, hello to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to our Ask the Expert webinar hosted by the Melanoma Research Foundation. My name is Caroline Glavin. I am the Education Program Manager for Rare Melanoma Subtypes here at the MRF, and we are so glad that you are joining us for this important discussion on acral melanoma, insights from research and real life. This program is part of our recent acral melanoma awareness efforts, including last week's hashtag Hands, Feet, and Nails campaign, which focused on increasing awareness of where acral melanoma can occur and the importance of early detection. Acral melanoma, as maybe some of you might know, is a rare subtype of melanoma that can present unique challenges in both diagnosis and treatment. And tonight we'll explore the latest research developments alongside the lived experience of someone navigating this disease. And tonight we're honored to be joined by Dr. Vito W, a leading researcher in melanoma with a focus on rare subtypes, and Rob Ainslie, who will share his experience, his personal experience living with acral melanoma. And do please stay to the end. We will have a Q&A session, both from previously submitted questions, and we will also have time for live Q&A questions as well. So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to share a little bit about the Melanoma Research Foundation, or the MRF. The MRF is the largest independent organization devoted to melanoma. Our work is grounded in three core pillars: education, advocacy, and research, all aimed at improving outcomes for patients and families. And we are dedicated to advancing medical research, raising awareness, and ultimately finding a cure for melanoma. At the MRF, we believe education empowers patients and families to make informed care decisions. We offer free resources for patients, caregivers, and providers. All are available for download or to order at no cost, and this is nationwide. We also partner with leading cancer centers to host in-person patient and caregiver symposia across the country, with upcoming programs this year in North Carolina, Florida, Washington, Ohio, and Connecticut, and our ocular melanoma symposium that we will be hosting in Miami, Florida in April. You can also explore even more on-demand education, including animated patient videos. Currently, we have 7 available and 1 in production, as well as our Ask the Expert webinars, as you are in tonight, and patient testimonials, all of which are available on our website at melanoma.org or our YouTube channel. And this is just a little bit of a snippet of some of our educational items. We are happy to share our new acral fact sheet, which is a 2-pager right here, and is a really wonderful resource. So if that could be of helpful to you, or if you're a provider and you want to have this in your care center, please do reach out. And then advocacy is another one of the MRF's core pillars, empowering patients and caregivers to make their voices heard. And each year we bring members of our community to Capitol Hill to meet with congressional leaders and advocates for increased cancer and specifically melanoma research funding. We actually have our Hill Day, it's our advocacy day, coming up next Monday on Capitol Hill. So we do try to typically host it around March each year. But we also do a handful of other events in the advocacy space. So if you're ever interested in advocacy opportunities or sharing your story to help drive change, please do connect with the MRF advocacy team at advocacy@melanoma.org. And then our third pillar is research, and research is at the heart of our mission, supporting scientists who have discovered and their discoveries have led to better treatments, improved outcomes, and new hope for melanoma patients. This slide highlights some of the groundbreaking research the MRF has funded in the past and continues to support today. And again, there is a little QR code here, so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about our research and what we have funded, please do take a look there. We also do highlight the researchers that we have funded. So feel free to take a look there. And this is all available on our website as well at melanoma.org. Then we also offer a variety of patient and caregiver support services. We have a patient and community forum. We also have a treatment center finder that we're continuing to update. financial assistant resources, and something that I think is particularly cool that we offer is called an Ask a Nurse hotline. And this is an oncology certified nurse who is available via the phone or email. Her name is Whitney. She's a wonderful resource. Obviously, she's not going to give any specific medical recommendations necessarily, but she can answer your questions, kind of guide you in the right direction. Even if you want to prep for a doctor's appointment and just kind of run through some of your questions by her, that's a great resource to talk through. And then we can go to our next one. Another resource is our clinical trial finder. And it is an invaluable tool that connects patients with trials tailored to their specific diagnosis, ensuring they receive the most up-to-date care options available. And you can find this information on our website underneath Patient Care tab. And you can even request a navigator to talk you through this process. That's something that's particular to this clinical trial finder is they connect you with a navigator. So you can talk through if a trial seems right for you. Maybe if you have to travel for it, you kind of talk through different options of how to make that possible. So it's free and it's a really, really wonderful tool. So, feel free to take advantage of this. Again, this is on our website underneath the Patient Care tab. And there are a lot of ways and many different opportunities to support the work of the MRF through a variety of programs, events, and research funding. We host events such as the patient symposiums, as I mentioned earlier. We also host Miles for Melanoma 5Ks in all cities around the country. And we hope that you can join us at one of these events. Hopefully there will be some in your neighborhood. If you're interested in getting involved in different ways to support the MRF, you can reach out to GALAS, GALAS, at melanoma.org to learn more about ways you can engage in the melanoma community while investing in our shared mission. And we also do, as I mentioned, host these galas here. One is in New York and one is in Denver. So these are our save the dates for those galas. The New York one will be in October of 2026, and the Denver one will be in September. So we hope to see you there. And then this is just another way to kind of connect with the MRF. We have two newsletters. One is monthly, and it is called Spotlight. And that is all melanoma updates. We also host one or offer one that is specifically for the ocular melanoma community, and that's a quarterly newsletter. But if you're interested in getting on either of those newsletter mailing lists, please feel free to scan this QR code and you can sign up. And lastly, the best way to learn about the MRF, including information about our education, advocacy, or research programs, awareness campaigns, and upcoming events, is to follow us on our social medias. We're really committed to posting on our socials and making sure that people know kind of what's happening. We have a lot of awareness campaigns. We like to share articles and just kind of different things in the research space, as well as advocacy and education. So we would love to connect with you on those. We also, in our campaigns, do offer times to spotlight patient stories. So if you're ever interested in having your story be spotlighted, please do reach out. We would love to work with you. And again, for more information, please do reach out to themelanoma.org. That is our website, and you can learn everything and anything. We have a tab for all of our diseases. We have cutaneous, and then we also have all of our rare melanomas broken down in tabs. It's treatment, diagnosis, and then more information. So we have support groups and different information there. So it's a great resource. So we hope to see you there. All right. Now I will be sharing. Before we kind of get into things, we have a little bit of housekeeping here. Again, thank you all so much for being here. We really, we're thrilled to have you with us. As I mentioned, this is, really kind of our favorite part of the work that we do is to be able to connect with patients and to have a space to have patients' voices be heard. So we're just thrilled that you're here with us tonight. So as I said, please remember that we have the Q&A box to share your questions during the session. And just as a reminder, the information shared tonight is for educational purposes. So please connect with your healthcare provider if you have any specific personal treatment questions. And at the end of our session, when the Zoom closes, a survey will pop up, and we do really appreciate you filling those out if you have the time. Your feedback is valuable and does really help us shape future programs. All right. So now I am going to jump into introducing our first speaker of the night, which is Dr. Vito Rebecca, an assistant professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Rebecca leads a research program focused on understanding and overcoming therapy resistance and metastasis in melanoma, with particular emphasis on rare subtypes such as acral melanoma. His work integrates advanced laboratory models and Omnic's approach to identify new therapy opportunities, and his research has been supported by the NIH, the Department of Defense, Melanoma Research Alliance, and the Melanoma Research Foundation, as well as other institutional awards. This evening, Dr. Rebecca will share insights from the research side, including current updates in acral melanoma science, emerging treatment strategies, and what these advancements may mean for patients now and in the future. All right, Dr. Rebecca, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Carolyn. Can you hear me, see the slides?
Looks great.
Great. So thanks everybody for being on the call. It's my pleasure to introduce a bit of the acral melanoma research fields and a bit of what our laboratory is studying to try to come up with better cures to address the aggressiveness of this disease. I am here to try to provide as much information to all of you as possible. So please, as you think of questions, write them down in the chat or write them down, and definitely look forward to a nice discussion. And so a story that we're particularly excited about, a discovery we just made, is how the skin on the bottom of your foot is quite unique. It has unique biomechanical properties. It's where acral lentiginous melanoma, I'll call it just acral melanoma for short, it's the most common site of acral melanoma. About 78% of acral melanomas arise in the bottom of the foot, but no one really knows why. And no one knows why the skin of the foot might contribute to worse clinical features. And so we have a study that I'll show you a bit of data showing how the elevated stiffness in the skin of the foot actually contributes to this more aggressive biology of acral. And we're excited because we believe it might provide a vulnerability so that we can design treatments specifically tailored toward acral melanoma biology to try to make a difference in the clinic. So as many of you know, melanoma is a major public health burden. It arises from the cells in your skin that make pigment. These cells are called melanocytes, and when they get transformed, they turn into melanoma. And so the worldwide incidence of melanoma is rapidly rising. It's one of the few advanced cancers that continues to rise. Lung cancer has been going down, much because of public awareness with smoking, but melanoma keeps going up. In the United States, in the year 2026, there's an estimated 100,000 new cases that will be diagnosed, and it costs the US healthcare system about $5.7 billion. Now, something that's quite interesting about melanoma being from melanocytes is that melanocytes exist throughout your body. They're not just in your skin. You have melanocytes in your heart, you have melanocytes in your eye. That's what's responsible for your eye color. And depending on where that melanocyte arises, that becomes transformed, actually dictates the type of melanoma you get. So the most common type of melanoma many have heard of, at least many have known a bit about, is the type that's associated with sunlight. So these are classified as cutaneous melanomas. They're lentigo maligna, nodular, and superficial spreading is the most common type of cutaneous melanoma that has been studied. Then there's other types. If you have melanocytes on the bottom of your foot, your hands, your nail beds, you can get something called acral lentiginous melanoma. If the melanocyte is in your eye that gets transformed, you can get uveal melanoma. And then if melanocytes in mucosal parts of your body, including your mouth, you get mucosal melanoma. And so these last three are considered rare melanomas. They're much more aggressive. They're much less studied. And there are far fewer clinical strategies to treat these melanomas. To address some of these shortcomings, our laboratory mostly focuses on acral lentiginous melanoma. And so One of the things that is not on our side with acral lentiginous melanoma is many people have not heard of acral lentiginous melanoma. Not many people know to look at your hands, your nail beds, the bottom of your foot. In fact, some dermatologists we come across, we hear from some patients that their dermatologist didn't check the bottom of their foot. And so education and awareness of this type of melanoma is just not where it needs to be. So one of the things our laboratory very actively engages in is with patients that have gone through acral melanoma, patients that are currently going through acral melanoma. And so here is a piece we published a few years ago documenting some of the journeys that patients have gone through coming out on the other side. We also have inspiration from patients, what they're going through and how it guides what we actually study in the laboratory. And so Eric Niles is a recent patient we actually were introduced to through the MRF. He had a remarkable response to a combination of drugs, and there's no paper ever published showing that this combination might even work in acral melanoma. So we actually have a research project focused on trying to understand why was this combination so successful, and can we identify other patients that would also benefit. You're also going to hear from Robert Ainslie, who is currently going through acral melanoma. And from his experiences, we're also in the laboratory thinking of how to study the different treatments he's receiving at the moment to see how we can further build our knowledge in that area. And so our laboratory for these efforts also frequently collaborates with the MRF through Advocacy Day and other events such as this. In terms of getting public awareness to where it needs to be, in the past, there was a lot of success with something called the ABCDs of melanoma. Unfortunately, this campaign, even though it was very successful, it was only really successful for cutaneous melanoma. The ABCDs don't really apply to acral. And so our laboratory has created the cubed infographic, which is much more tailored toward how acral melanomas arise. And so far, we've been successful in actually creating a pamphlet that we've partnered with dermatology clinics in the Baltimore and DC area, where we spread this information to people who might not be looking at those sites, but most at risk, so that they can learn more about acral melanoma and know where to go in case, God forbid, something looks suspicious. We're also partnering with neighborhood businesses. In Baltimore, the Charm City Runs company is the biggest running company in the area. So we're actually also working to organize a race event to, again, spread awareness for people to look on the bottom of the foot, hands, and nail beds. Also, something you might appreciate with rare melanomas is that there's not a lot of disease models available for researchers to study. Anything that is clinically tested, clinical trial, eventual FDA approval, the majority of these trials are started because there's some kind of scientific proof that came out of a laboratory. For a laboratory to create any kind of scientific proof, they need cell lines, cells that they can grow in petri dishes, and then they can study them and find their weaknesses, and then tell the clinician, hey, you might want to try this in a patient. In cutaneous melanoma, the type that's been mostly studied, there's more than 4,000 cell lines. And it's not a surprise, there's more than 16 FDA-approved treatments for patients with cutaneous melanoma. For acral, there's about 25 cell lines, so a big difference from 4,000. And it's not a surprise that there's not a single FDA-approved treatment specifically tailored for acral melanoma patients. These patients get treated with what patients with cutaneous melanoma have been optimized for. And so this is a massive gap in the field, and our laboratory recently received funding from the Department of Defense to create what we're calling the Rare Melanoma Translational Core, so that we can create 100 new models to equip researchers with the ability to study these cell lines and then better guide the clinicians on what should be treated. So I believe we had some questions on how are some ways that people can better engage for acral melanoma research. I've shared my email here, but one of the things that is just, ultimately unparalleled, what's the word I'm thinking of? Priceless, is any kind of sharing of potential tumor tissue or information of what you've gone through, because all of that information can help fuel this foundation of knowledge to then move things forward clinically. So, acral melanoma biology, because of the lack of these models, is an enigma. We don't know too much about acral. With cutaneous melanoma, CM, we know a world of information. We know not only about the tumor, We know about all the other cells within the skin that interact with the tumor, how certain treatments change the tumor, change the cells around the tumor. We know such a wealth of information, and that's helped allow for the FDA approval of more than 16 drugs. When I first began studying melanoma and learning that so little, not so little, learning that these patients don't have the best outcome, and not much is known in the literature. At first, I thought acral melanoma must have been discovered, in 2005, 2006, but it was actually discovered in 1977. So we've known about acral melanoma for quite some time, but for the powers that be, for whatever reasons they may be, this has not been a priority until really the last 5 to 10 years. So unfortunately, because not enough has been done in the preclinical research world, these patients are treated with what has been optimized for cutaneous melanoma. Even though the biology of acral is completely different, these patients get treated with what's been optimized and approved for cutaneous melanoma. And then it's not a surprise that the overall survival rates, if you have stage 4 metastatic acral melanoma, is less than 16%. And so this is the massive issue, the massive problem in the acral melanoma field, and why our laboratory focuses completely on understanding the biology so that we can fix this 5-year overall survival rate. So in the way of resistance drivers, so when you treat a patient with a certain drug, why does the tumor not respond? Or why does the tumor respond initially, but then the tumor comes back? Very little is known. Our laboratory actually in 2024 published the first paper documenting how acral melanoma cells might resist a type of therapy called targeted therapy. This was a very honoring thing that we felt very proud of. But again, it's very sad that in 2024 is the very first time this kind of a study is published. And so our laboratory since then has published a piece just last year looking at other resistance mechanisms. And we have here a drug screen where we are trying to identify other drugs that might specifically be more successful in acral versus other melanoma subtypes. Something we're also studying heavily is what is driving metastasis. Metastasis is what ultimately leads to patient mortality. And so it's critical that we understand how do these tumor cells spread throughout the body. Unfortunately, this is another area that remains poorly understood for acral. And so I'll share with you a few slides on a project specifically focused on what drives metastasis to help guide what can we treat the patients with to try to address this metastatic disease. Something about acral melanoma, some of you may have heard also, is that there's racial disparities. Patients that are of Hispanic descent, Black descent, or Asian Pacific Islander descent actually suffer worse outcomes compared to patients that are non-Hispanic white. And no one knows exactly why. So another project in our laboratory is also trying to understand if there might be unique biological phenomena in acral melanomas from different patient demographics so that we can come up with treatments that are more tailored for this race, ethnicity, or that. We also have projects looking at aging, looking at gender. All these properties actually influence the biology of the disease. And so we need to make sure we develop treatments that take all of those factors into consideration so that these patients have the best chance. So what we focus on here then is metastasis, because this is the main thing driving patient mortality. So what we know in acral melanoma, and I want to make sure I give myself enough space because Robert is going to give an excellent few minutes at the end. So Carolyn, if you can just give me maybe a 15-minute heads up just in case I go into that. I want to make sure Robert has plenty of time. So what we know about acral melanoma clinical phenotypes is that these patients have worse 5-year overall survival rates compared to cutaneous melanoma. And we know these patients have an elevated rate of distant metastasis. Now, we've known this for quite some time. And what people have guessed is the reason, and even published opinions on why, is maybe it's just due to factors such as a more thick tumor at presentation for acral versus cutaneous, or these patients have a more advanced stage at presentation, and that's what's driving this. And in fact, in general, patients with acral do present at a more advanced stage. And part of that is because acral melanoma doesn't arise on places that are checked that often. Not many people are checking on the bottom of the foot. So it's a valid point that more patients present at a more advanced stage. But is that why it has an elevated metastatic rate? And so a few stories have carefully controlled for the tumor stage. And if they compare stage 1, stage 2 cutaneous melanoma patients to stage 1, stage 2 acral melanoma patients, the acral melanoma patients still have a greater rate of distant metastasis. Same thing with tumor thickness. Making sure the tumor thicknesses are the same across the acral versus cutaneous patient buckets, we still see that these acral melanoma cells have an elevated rate of distant metastasis, suggesting that there might be something biological at hand making an acral melanoma much more likely to spread throughout the body compared to a cutaneous melanoma. But what might that be? That is the big question in our laboratory. We have 10 members, and every one of them is trying to answer this question. So the way we investigate this problem is through the lens of nature versus nurture. Some of you might have heard of this concept of nature versus nurture. Sometimes when people have studied twins in the past, one twin might grow up to do great things. The other twin might grow up to do not great things. Is it because they had different raisings, different households? Are brothers that have different genetics, is that part of the reason? So when we think of nature, nature is talking about the potential genetic differences between individuals. In this case, genetic differences between different types of tumor that we're curious, is that why acral is more aggressive? Is it because they have unique genetics? The nurture is the kid in this household being raised in a different way, is being nurtured in a different way that might facilitate greatness versus a life of crime. The same thing we're thinking with these tumors. The tumors of acral arise in a different environment, a different household. They're mostly in the bottom of the foot. Is there something about the foot environment that's nurturing this aggressiveness? And so that's the theme that our laboratory is focusing on. Is it nature, nurture, or maybe a combination in terms of why acral melanoma is much more aggressive? Now, there are quite significant differences in the nature between an acral melanoma and a cutaneous melanoma. Acral melanomas, their chromosomes are all messed up to a significantly greater degree compared to cutaneous melanoma. They have these things called structural rearrangements. That means different pieces of your chromosome are cut and glued to another part. That's something that happens far more frequently with acral versus cutaneous. We also know that when a melanocyte in the foot gets mutated and transformed, the way it evolves into a melanoma is very different than the way a melanocyte on your back might transform into a cutaneous melanoma. We also know that the genes that are mutated are very different between acral melanomas and cutaneous melanomas. And there's this thing called identity. If anyone has ever heard of Ancestry.com, it works by looking at certain genetic properties, and that's how it can tell whether you might be of an Asian background, a European background, North American background. So we have certain abilities with the tumor cells to also look at certain genetic properties, and we can tell whether they're cutaneous versus acral. And so there is a unique identity between acral and cutaneous. And so are any of these nature properties what's responsible for the elevated aggressiveness of acral? When we think of nurture, the element of the microenvironment and how that's different, that's also pretty distinct for acral. So these are the frequencies. About 20% of acral melanomas are in subungual sites. So those are your fingernail beds, your toenail beds. About 8 to 10% are palmar, so the skin of your palm. And then about 70% of acrals are on plantar skin, the bottom of your foot that you plant on the ground. And so what is interesting about these different skin sites compared to cutaneous skin sites is that there's unique biomechanical properties. When you think about your foot, all day long, you're walking around, there's compression of that skin, there's greater amounts of collagen to address, all that load you're putting on it. The skin is stiffer. And so each of those biomechanical properties that are distinct, could they be contributing to a more aggressive biology? We know that the immune landscape, the different cells that can protect you from disease, are very different in the skin of the foot versus other skin sites, as well as other types of cells in that skin. So the next few slides, we're going to just explore these concepts of nature versus nurture in regard to acral melanoma metastasis to see if we can try to learn some unforeseen truths about what's driving acral melanoma metastasis, and then maybe that can inspire how we treat it. So to begin investigating this problem, we collaborated with David Liu at the Dana-Farber. And so David is a pathologist, a bioinformatician, and we were able to access 17 patients with plantar acral on the bottom of the foot and 540 patients with cutaneous melanoma throughout the body. And luck had it that we had enough detailed clinical information that we could tell all of these different metastatic sites for each of these patients. So we had a really wonderful data set. When we look at these two sets of samples, the plantar acral melanomas on the bottom of the foot or the cutaneous melanomas, we see that those cutaneous melanomas, they have a greater tumor mutational burden, TMB. That just means they're more mutated. And this makes sense because the cutaneous melanomas arise on parts of your body where you have sunlight. The sunlight is causing all of those mutations. The acral melanomas, bottom of the foot, they're not really seeing as much sunlight, and that's why you see a lower tumor mutational burden. You see also fewer mutation signatures associated with UV light. You see the age is about the same, and the gender breakdown between these two patient cohorts is about the same. So this is on par with what people have previously published on acral versus cutaneous. We next checked on the survival outcomes. As I mentioned, if you look on this here, this is the probability of survival. This is time. You see that patients with acral melanomas on the bottom of the foot suffer worse outcomes compared to cutaneous melanoma. And you see that when you look at the mean cumulative sites, this is the number of metastatic sites these patients acquire over time. You also see that the plantar acral melanomas are much more metastatic over time. So this is already what we know from the literature. We can't really tell anything about nature versus nurture because the nature of these two types of melanoma are so different. We don't know if this elevated metastatic property is because their nature is different or the nurture is different. So what if we could find a data set where the tumors in that data set were much more similar in their nature, so we could finally explore maybe if nurture is playing a role. So to accomplish this, we luckily were able to identify 13 additional acral melanoma patients. And what was special about these is that they had dorsal acral melanoma. That means the acral melanoma was on top of their foot, as compared to the plantar acral melanoma on the bottom of the foot. Can people see my mouse? I just want to make sure I'm pointing around. I don't know if it
Yes.
might not be. Okay, good.
Yeah, we
Good.
can see.
Actually, let me get a laser pointer. Good. So when we look at the properties of the plantar on the bottom of the foot acral versus dorsal acral melanoma on the top of the foot, we see that they have very similar tumor mutational burden. They have very similar mutation signatures. And so these two buckets of acral melanoma are very similar in nature. They have very similar genetic background. The only thing that's different is the dorsal on top, the plantar on the bottom. So this gave us the opportunity to see, is there maybe something special that's being nurtured in that skin on the bottom of the foot versus the skin on the bottom of the foot? So when we check the overall survival, we find that the patients with dorsal acral melanoma in green actually have far better outcomes compared to those plantar acral melanomas on the bottom of the foot. And those patients on the bottom of the foot are also much less metastatic compared to those plantar acral melanomas on the bottom of the foot. So all of this suggests that there is something that is driving aggression, and it's driving aggression through the element of nurture in the bottom of the foot. Because when you look at melanomas that have very similar genetics, very similar nature, the only difference being the nurture, we see that this elevated metastatic capacity is occurring. Now, this is interesting data, provocative data, but we next asked as experimentalists, could we better design experiments to test experimentally the role of nature versus nurture? So before I show you the experiments, I'll show you one more slide where we take advantage of the high resolution of metastasis we have in this cohort of clinical information. So with that set of cases, we are able to determine across these three different buckets of patients whether they had metastasis to the peritoneal, like the intestines, the lung, liver, brain, bone, and adrenal. What we found is that the plantar acral melanomas in the bottom of the foot have an elevated metastatic capacity toward the peritoneal, toward the lungs, the liver, the bone, and the adrenal gland compared to cutaneous melanomas or dorsal acral melanomas on the top of the foot. Also, we find that dorsal acral melanomas have a distinct metastatic pattern compared to cutaneous melanoma, where dorsal has an elevated frequency toward the liver compared to the cutaneous, and the cutaneous have an elevated frequency toward the brain compared to the dorsal. So these are interesting observations. Now, let me show you how we try to experimentally tease out the contributions of nature versus nurture in the laboratory. So to accomplish this, we are now going to keep nature constant. We're going to keep the genetics and the type of melanoma subtype we're testing constant, and we're going to simply change the skin site that we're implanting these tumor cells to see if it makes any kind of biological difference. So to accomplish this, we first started with mouse melanoma cell lines. And what we did was we either implanted it into non-plantar skin in the flank of the mouse. This is where cutaneous melanoma would more arise in a person, or in the plantar skin on the bottom of the foot, better modeling where acral melanoma arises in a patient. And we asked, would it make a difference in metastasis? Strikingly, we find when we look at the livers of these mice, we're able to detect this protein called luciferin. Terrible name for a protein, but like Lucifer, it glows very bright, like a hellfire, I guess, was the inspiration for the name. But here, when we look at that luciferase activity, we see that 80% of the mice implanted in the plantar skin on the bottom of the foot had liver metastasis, and not a single mouse implanted in the back, the non-plantar skin, had a metastasis, suggesting that something about the skin on the bottom of the foot was dramatically increasing that ability to spread. So that was using mouse cutaneous melanoma cells. We also tested making a first-in-class mouse acral melanoma model where we implant and transform cells directly in the foot pad. And we see again that these tumors implanted in the plantar skin are more metastatic in these mice. In this model, the brain and the lungs compared to those in the non-plantar skin. And then finally, as our lab is interested in, obviously, human acral melanoma, also, if you implant human acral melanomas in the foot versus flank, you see a significant increase in their ability to spread, in this case, to the lungs and the brain, compared to those mice implanted in the non-plantar skin of the flank. All to say, something about the skin of the foot is nurturing this phenomena of metastasis in these mice, independent of genetics, because the cells we implant in the back of the mouse or the foot have identical genetics. They're only simply changing where they're being implanted. So I told you about this identity property of acral melanoma, similar to an Ancestry.com, 23andMe property. So this was previously published showing that acral melanomas have a unique biomarker collection compared to cutaneous melanoma. And many in the melanoma fields actually believe that acral melanoma is so different biologically from cutaneous melanoma because the melanocytes of the foot are very different than the melanocytes of the back, the cutaneous melanocytes. And our laboratory asked the question whether this identity is hardwired. So if you're in acral melanoma, regardless of where you're growing in the body, you're always going to have that same acral melanoma identity. Or if you transplant that acral melanoma to a different part of the body, will it appear to look more cutaneous-like? Many in the field think it's hardwired. Our laboratory, because of this model we've developed, we wanted to put this to test. So when we look at that identity, the higher on this axis that this identity is, the value, the more acral-like it is. And so here we were using a murine cutaneous melanoma cell line. And interestingly, when we implant it into the skin of the foot, the plantar skin, it actually looks more acral-like. And if we stick that cutaneous melanoma cell line in the flank, the non-plantar skin, it looks more cutaneous-like. So we see that with murine cutaneous melanomas, and we also see that with human acral melanomas. We could actually make a human acral melanoma look cutaneous-like if we stick it in the non-plantar skin of the back. And so there appears to be something that we call an identity crisis, that there is an identity that can define an acral melanoma versus cutaneous melanoma, but that identity shifts if you change the microenvironment, the skin site that melanoma actually exists. So that was a very unexpected finding, that this identity is fluid. And our laboratory then was interested what in the skin of the foot is actually controlling that identity. Because if we consider that acral melanomas are less likely to respond to treatment and they have a unique identity, if we could shift their identity to be more cutaneous-like, maybe we could shift them to be more sensitive to therapy and then increase the chances that these patients survive. And so a property that is actually quite distinct about plantar skin of the foot versus non-plantar skin on the arm, for example, is stiffness. The plantar skin is significantly stiffer compared to non-plantar skin. So we took our acral melanoma cells and we grow them on special gels that have the same stiffness as the bottom of the foot. So we call those stiff versus gels that have the stiffness for skin, say on the chest or your back, and those are soft. And we wanted to see, does that also change the identity? And so to look at identity, we have certain markers we look at. And suffice to say, the stiffness increases certain properties that make these cells more acral, and it decreases in orange certain properties that make them less cutaneous-like. So the stiffness in the skin is one of the things that's driving that identity shift. And we explored certain proteins that get activated by stiff. So stiffness in the foot can actually activate these proteins called FAK-SARC-YAP. So we use drugs against FAK-SARC-YAP to see if cells on stiffness, we can block that acral identity from being induced. And compared to this light blue, which is just the untreated vehicle control, when we look at the dark blue, which is a FAK inhibitor, the orange, which is the SARC inhibitor, or the yellow, which is this TEAD inhibitor, we could actually block this identity. We can prevent the acral identity from occurring. So that's interesting. And we know now that part of this identity crisis, the stiffness in the foot, is what's helping govern the identity of acral versus cutaneous. But is that functional? Does that make a difference for the ability of these cells to metastasize or invade? That is the real key question, because we want to stop the invasion of these cells. We want to stop the metastasis. And so to explore this, we take cells that are grown either on soft or stiff gels, and then we put them through this special chamber, and it measures how able the cells are to invade through that chamber. And here in blue is the cells that are invading. So every little blue spot is an individual cell. So we find that the stiffness is actually also increasing the ability of these acral melanoma cells to invade within our laboratory setting. Also, the cutaneous melanomas, if they're put on a stiff environment, also are much more invasive, suggesting to us that maybe acral is more lethal, more aggressive than cutaneous, not because there's something different about the genetics, but acral cells, because they find themselves in the bottom of your foot, that environment is so much more nurturing. That's why they're more aggressive. And if you stuck a cutaneous melanoma in the foot or in a stiff environment, they would also become more aggressive. Importantly, when we inhibit these different pathway proteins, FAK, SARC, and TEAD, we can block that stiffness-induced invasion. And then most importantly, using our mouse model, where we stick the tumor cells in the foot and we treat with the FAK, SARC, TEAD inhibitor, we have some provocative evidence that we could potentially control the metastatic spread of these cells if we block that stiffness-induced pathway. As you can see in these treated mice, each row is a different treatment compared to the vehicle. So in summary, in terms of the findings of this study, we find that nurture appears to be playing a significant role. Nature, we did not find any significant contribution to the phenotypes of metastasis in this study. We find that the acral melanoma cells on the bottom of the foot are much more metastatic than acral melanoma cells on the top of the foot, even though their nature is almost the same. We find that if you implant tumor cells in the bottom of the foot, you increase the metastatic ability of those tumor cells compared to those same tumor cells in the back of the foot, at the back of the mouse. And if you treat with this FAK-SARC-YAP set of inhibitors, you could potentially block metastasis. And so in closing, this is the remarkable A team, the acral melanoma trainees, postdocs in our laboratory that do all of this excellent work. Collaborators we have at Johns Hopkins University across the globe, some of the funding that provided for this line of investigation. And I'll give the rest of my time to Robert, and then maybe we could do a question session at the end.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca.
Of course.
Really a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and really, trying to help us better understand the research landscape in Acral. So thank you so much.
Of course.
So as Vito mentioned, I am now honored to introduce Rob Ainslie, who will share the patient perspective this evening. Rob recently retired after more than 30 years working in international public health with the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs, with experience across multiple countries and global health initiatives. And tonight, Rob will be sharing a little bit about his own personal experience living with acral melanoma and really offering the invaluable perspective of someone navigating this disease. So Rob, take it away.
Yeah, the audio's off. Hi, thanks. Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks, Caroline, for setting this up and having all of us on. Vito did an excellent overview and what they're doing in their lab. I've been to the lab, and it's an exciting place, and they have a great group of people there. It's always exciting to go there and hear what new things they're looking at. So I'm Rob Ainslie, and I started my long journey of cancer back in about April 2024 when I noticed a kind of a lump on the bottom of my foot and on the ball of the foot, which is not the heel, I found out. And I tried to take care of it myself, a little compound W, figured it was a wart, and didn't get better, kind of became painful when I walked and started to become an open wound. So after about 2 months of kind of walking and hobbling around, I ended up going to a podiatrist who looked at it and said, well, it looks like a wound. And so kind of addressed it as a wound problem and had a nurse, a wound care nurse, work with me on that. So figuring that it would be about a week or two before it would heal, they gave me some wound care supplies to work on it. And because of travel and some other things in that summer, it kind of got better, kind of didn't, kind of did. And I wasn't able to get back until about September of 2024 to the podiatrist. And by that time, it had become a little knobby thing, kind of outgrowing, which I later found out was the tumor. And so they looked at it and said, yeah, if we cut that out, we can start again. And it would probably take a week to heal. So they finally, in I think it's October, we got it removed. They called it a large hypergranular soft tissue mass with a hard core extruding from the plantar forefoot that has been growing in size. That's all I knew it was. And they said, yeah, it's a granular growth. We'll cut it out. Won't be a problem. So they did cut it out. And she said, as they cut it out, everything we cut out, we send to pathology to get it. So about a week or two later, as we do now, we get the results, and I saw it pop up on my screen. So I looked at it and I said, oh, well, here's the results from the pathology. And it said a malignant acral melanoma. And at first I'm like, wait, is malignant the bad one or is it benign? I asked my wife, malignant, did she know? And she goes, anything that starts with mal is always bad. So I'm like, oh, okay, so I don't think it's a good one. So that's when it kind of started this long, strange journey that I've been on ever since. The next day, I got an appointment the next day with an oncological surgeon who was looking at it to be able to remove it. And that's when it really hit me. I tried to read up a little the night before, but it's like, you know what, maybe this isn't so bad. Then he started about having what they called the wide local excision. So taking the tumor out, what was left of it. And he said, well, we'll probably take 3 or 4 of the toes off or possible amputation and of the foot. And so that's where I said, okay, this is something that is really kind of serious. And looking at it, when looking at the tumor in the pathology report, it came out, everything was bad about it. It was very large. It was 5.7 millimeters, which is very large. It's ulcerated, so it popped out. So that's not good. The Clark level was 4, which is kind of a measurement of how far it goes up into the skin. And it had a high mitotic rate of kind of how my daughter helped me remember this, of how cells replicate. So it kind of checked all the bad boxes. And so we were kind of like, what's the decision to do and how do we do it? And they did say, we want to do the wide local excision. That would take it out. And they would also do a biopsy of the lymph nodes. And so reading up on this, I kind of found out about it being a rare melanoma, and there wasn't much info on it. So there wasn't much you could read. Of course, when you find this out, you start looking at survivability rates, what it looks like, and you can go down some dark rabbit holes, and they kind of advise you not to Google that stuff. You learn about overall response rate and what we heard, recurrence-free survival. So all these things were new and looking up, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know melanoma was that, was that bad. Having a rare one, the more and more I read about it, really found out there wasn't much about it. There wasn't much studies done, and as Vito pointed out, there were no targeted therapies. Everything they used were things that worked for cutaneous melanoma and hoped that it worked for acral melanoma. And we know that acral melanoma is very aggressive, high recurrence, has a high recurrence rate, and it also has a high metastasis rate, as well as kind of not performing well for a lot of the stuff that works for cutaneous melanoma. So we started on therapies, immunotherapy, which is a way to kind of get your own cells working, your own immune system kind of going against the cancer. And so I started on one that was called Keytruda, a Pembro, and which is a kind of immune checkpoint inhibitor. And without going down to details, it really gets going and blocks some of the checkpoints that the cancer needs to work, and then your own immune system can target that. So I was on that for about 4 months. And we kind of looked at it, and we kind of felt that there was a tumor growing in my groin in the lymph nodes. And we did a biopsy, and we saw that there was progression, so that it wasn't working, and it had recurrence back into the lymph nodes. And then in July of last year, in 2025, there was recurrence where they had removed it. So it just started out as a small little bump. And so we're watching that. So they decided, let's switch me to a combo immunotherapy, which was ipi-nivo, and was on that for 2 months. And between those 2 months, the one in my groin and the one in the foot kept growing. So we knew that wasn't working, and there continued to be progression. So my docs at Hopkins suggested I get into a clinical trial for a thing called RP1, which was a modified virus, actually herpes simplex 1, which they inject into the tumor, but it has systemic property, so it works on all tumors in your body. So I was really excited about that. It did take a long time to get randomized. So it was a randomized trial. So unfortunately, I got randomized to standard of care, which was yet another immunotherapy. I did not get the new drug. So I was on that for another 2 months and got scans right before I started. And then we saw, like Vito said, it metastasized to my lungs. So I had small nodules on the lungs. So then I had lungs, the groin, and the foot. Was on that for 2 months, and because I could see the tumor on the foot, so it grew on the outside of my foot, under my toes, I could tell that there was progression. The immunotherapy wasn't working, and that immunotherapy was called Abduolog. It's a combo also, and decided to go back to this was in another hospital in Washington, D.C. So then after 2 months, I decided it wasn't working. I kind of conferred to the clinical trial team, and they kind of said, yeah, you could probably say it's not working. Scans were going to be in another 2 months, I think. So I decided to get off the clinical trial and go back to Hopkins, my team, and we started TILS. And that's the tumor infiltrating lymphocyte therapy that I just went through. I just got out of the hospital about a week and a half ago. And that they took one tumor out, and they took the T cells out of that tumor and replicated those and expanded those to about 75 billion. And they put those back into my body, so that they wiped out my immune system so this could start new, and then gave me another type of immunotherapy that would kind of get it going. And so that's my next therapy. And now we're just waiting to see if the response. TILS it's been FDA approved back in 2024, approved for those people that have unresectable cancer, stage 4, and that have not metastasized and have failed other lines of therapy. So by this time, I had failed 3 lines of therapy. So right now we're waiting to see what happens. That we have a response rate. TILS does have a good response rate, and it's durable. I've heard of people that have acral melanoma, actually talking with the team here with the Melanoma Research Foundation, that there are people that have no evidence of disease after going through TILS with acral melanoma. So that gives me a lot of hope. living with melanoma with a reoccurrence, it becomes a quality of life issue. It's very hard for me to get around now. I have the tumor on the bottom of my foot, which is still there, is about the size of a mandarin orange, and it does make walking a little difficult. So really need to look at how to move forward with kind of quality of life issues, even if we do have shrinkage, which would be the response rate we would want from TILs. Is there would be shrinkage, but it's still going to be there. So there's a lot of quality of life issues that I never thought about, that we'll have to deal with. And with acral melanoma, it's rare, as Vito said, and not research. We're very, very happy, and I get really ecstatic when I'm at Vito's lab to see that people are really focused on this. And this is the only lab in the world, I think, that is focused 100% on acral melanoma. So it brings joy that there are people looking at how to really figure this one out, get a drug that can be treated for acral melanoma. And it's aggressive. So we know that it's as Vito showed in the slides, it's going to metastasize. I already have it in my lungs. Hopefully it doesn't go to the brain or other places. We're kind of pushing that away and hoping this has the response that I want. And it has been somewhat, it's not the easiest thing to go through, but I've been very, very, very fortunate to have a very supportive family and friends, both here in Baltimore and all around the world, that have showed so much support and always wanting to do and help in any way they can. My wife has been with me every step of the way. She's my main advocate, pushing questions and making sure we understand everything. But she's also my main caregiver. She's been, the last 3 weeks, we've kind of gone through a little hell, and she's been there every step of the way. Anything I can, anything she can do and anything I need, she's there. And that's really important going through this, is to have that support, whether it's family or friends, neighbors. We have neighbors willing to do anything, take our dog out for a walk when we're not here, help us drive to get to get to places, make paper cranes for good luck for us. So there's so much that helps keep me positive and keep my spirits lifted and keep me focused on getting through this. And it's critical that you have that support system. And I'm so lucky that I have my friends and family that I can count on whenever I need them. At any time, they're willing to drop whatever they're doing, in a second, and help out. And that's really, I think, that's helped my kind of mental health and keep me very positive through this, because I have it, I got to deal with it, and might as well be positive going through it and making sure that I don't get down, because if I get down, then it's not going to, my chances will be less to get through it. So that's been very, very, very important. It's not the easiest thing to deal with. And I think when everybody starts the journey, they start at a different place. And I used to laugh about, starting my cancer journey. And I did not know that it would take me the way it did. But I'm glad I have really good docs that explain, the nurses that explain, that give incredible care, researchers like Vito that are doing the real hard work to understand this and figure out what the best ways to deal with it, and how to stop the metastasis, how to get the drugs that are needed, and like the foundation, Caroline, that there are people dedicated to getting research, to getting funding, especially in this time that we're in right now, where funding is getting cut everywhere, especially at the government level, that we need to keep funding these programs to find cures. So that's kind of my story. I hope that was kind of clear. I didn't want to take too much time, because I know we wanted some questions too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rob. Really wonderful.
And I'm happy to stay as long as needed.
Thanks. Really wonderful perspective. And, I love what you touched on about the importance of community and having people in your circle. I led a support group for caregivers in my previous role, and I talked a lot about identifying your own care team, within your network. You have your care team of providers and experts, and also having that care team of your inner circle, friends, families, loved ones, neighbors. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for bringing that up. All right, so I know we're kind of at time here, but I know we have a handful of questions that were submitted. I think a lot of them were answered tonight, which speaks to the wonderful presentations from Dr. Rebecca and a lot of what Rob shared. Rob, I know you touched on your experience with TIL therapy, but I know one of the questions here was, does acral melanoma respond better, worse, or the same to TIL therapy compared to other melanoma subtypes? So really for both
Yeah,
of you.
right now the research isn't there. So what they've done is, I think that the main trial that went to FDA approval had like 156 people in it, but they didn't divide it out by subtype. So they just said it was all melanoma, cutaneous melanoma. They did have people that were with acral melanoma and mucosal melanoma also, but they haven't broken out. So we don't know the specifics about it. We only hear anecdotal, like the guy there, there's a guy that had TILs that had acral melanoma and he has no evidence of disease. So it's out there, but they don't have it partialed out in what's happening. I think as we get more and more people, like I think at Hopkins, I was the eighth or ninth TILs patient in the last year that's got it. So as more people get it, I think that base will build and we'll be able to see what it is, because acral melanoma, I think there's about 2,000, I think in the US, right, Vito? I mean, it's not about 2,000 people every year. Of the 100,000,
Yeah.
I think, of melanoma, it's about 2,000 that have acral melanoma. So there's not, their numbers are very limited. Like in the RP1 trial, there were 8, and they actually did an abstract for a conference that it had really good, like 44% response rate for those 8 acral melanoma. But they're so small, you can't generalize over everything. That was out of 200, 300.
Um, all right, and I know we had another question, and I know, Vito, you touched on this a little bit of kind of some of the efforts that you are all doing, but this question asks, are there outreach efforts to educate people with darker skin tones who may not typically consider themselves at risk about acromelanoma?
Yeah, that's a good initiative that needs expansion. I know the MRF is providing a lot of this information on their website. A few other foundations are trying to do this, but definitely not something that's been done quite as much as it probably needs to be done. So right now, some investigators throughout the country and throughout the world, it's kind of a grassroots effort, but definitely something that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I also just wanted to touch on what Rob was sharing about TIL. With our Acral campaign that we hosted last week, we did have a handful of patient testimonials, some of which are folks who have Acral and had TIL. So if you're interested in kind of hearing a little bit more of the patients that we've connected with that have experienced TIL, please feel free to, check back in with that. And then I think we have one more. Really, we're just, some of the questions in the Q&A box here are just a huge thank you to Rob and Dr. Rebecca. So I wanted to just shout those out as well. I think really those are all the questions. You answered all of the other ones. So that speaks to, again, the great presentation. So thank you for that. And then really, I think since we're kind of at time here, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up a little bit, but I wanted to again thank Dr. Vito, Rebecca, and Rob Ansell for sharing their expertise and experience with us. We're grateful for the insight, perspective, and hope that you brought to this discussion tonight. And thank you all to everyone who joined, whether you asked a question, listened in, or planned to share what you've learned with your community. You are helping to strengthen the acral melanoma community as a whole. So thank you for being here. And again, before you go, if you can, please take a moment to complete the survey regarding today's session. That would be wonderful. And a recording of tonight's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel soon, and we will email you the Zoom link. And as always, to learn more about upcoming events, educational materials, and advocacy opportunities, please do visit our website at melanoma.org. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us at education@melanoma.org. If you have any specific questions for our experts tonight, send them our way and we can always relay those messages. And we hope you'll be able to join us again for another Ask the Expert webinar, or hopefully maybe we'll see you at a patient symposium in the near future or a Miles event. I hope to see you at something soon. And again, thank you so much for being here. Please do take good care. And again, thank you so much to Dr. Rebecca and Rob. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.